If nothing in your life has felt like a real opportunity lately, that's not a dry spell. It's a filtering problem. And it's already costing you years. Because you're not missing opportunities at the decision stage. You're eliminating them before they even become visible. You go through your day thinking you're paying attention. Conversations, ideas, invitations. But unless something feels clear, structured, immediately relevant, it gets dismissed in seconds. And that feels rational. But here's the part most people don't see. The brain isn't prioritizing value. It's prioritizing recognition. Which means anything that doesn't look familiar, finished, or easy to process gets filtered out early, even if it had real upside. So over time, your decisions feel stable, but your trajectory doesn't change. Same types of inputs, same range of outcomes. Years pass, but nothing expands. And the real problem isn't that opportunities aren't showing up. It's that they're showing up in forms your brain is designed to ignore. This is the loop, and once you see it, it's hard to unsee. I'm going to break down 3 signs you're filtering for recognition instead of value. And 1 adjustment that changes what actually becomes visible to you. Most people carry a quiet expectation about how opportunity is supposed to feel. It should be clear. Not perfectly certain, but at least noticeable. Something that stands out from everything else. Something that interrupts the normal flow of the day and signals, this matters. So they move through their routines with a kind of passive alertness. Checking messages, listening to conversations, scanning for something that feels different enough to deserve attention. And when nothing obvious appears, they assume nothing important happened. The day continues. Small interactions blur together. Conversations feel ordinary. Ideas seem incomplete, unpolished, or slightly off. Nothing feels like a defining moment. So nothing is treated like one. And this becomes a quiet pattern. Not dramatic enough to notice, but consistent enough to shape outcomes. Because over time, entire weeks, months, even years can pass without a single moment that feels significant. Not because nothing happened, but because nothing matched the internal image of what significance is supposed to look like. And somewhere inside that pattern, something slightly off begins to emerge. Important things don't seem to arrive at all. The assumption is simple. If something has real potential, it should feel different immediately. But in practice, it rarely does. Most opportunities don't arrive as complete, coherent packages. They show up unfinished, slightly confusing, sometimes even inconvenient. A conversation that goes nowhere, at least on the surface. An idea that feels vague, almost impractical. An invitation that doesn't clearly connect to anything you're already doing. Nothing about these moments signals importance. In fact, they often carry the opposite signal. Uncertainty, friction, ambiguity. So they get categorized quickly. Not relevant, not now, not useful. And the day moves forward without interruption. But this creates a quiet distortion. Because what feels irrelevant in the moment is often just something that hasn't become legible yet. It doesn't fit into existing categories, so it gets dismissed before it has time to take shape. And slowly, a pattern forms. The clearer something looks, the more attention it receives. The less it resembles what you already understand, the faster it disappears. It's easy to assume that perception is about noticing more, paying attention, staying aware, being open. But most of what the brain does isn't about noticing. It's about removing. At any given moment, there's too much input to process. Conversations, ideas, signals, possibilities. So the brain filters aggressively, long before anything becomes a conscious decision. And the filter isn't neutral. It's shaped by what already makes sense. What feels familiar moves forward. What fits existing patterns gets processed. What aligns with expectations is allowed to stay visible. Everything else is quietly discarded, not rejected after consideration, erased before it even becomes an option. Which means something important can be present and still never exist from your perspective, not because it lacked value, but because it didn't survive the initial filter. And this creates the first real contradiction. You believe you're evaluating opportunities based on their potential. But in reality, most of them never reach the point of evaluation at all. They disappear upstream, before they can even be recognized. Once something survives the filter, it carries a subtle advantage. It feels easier to understand, not necessarily better, just clearer, more interpretable, more immediately coherent. And that clarity starts to be mistaken for value. Opportunities that resemble what you've already seen before begin to feel more legitimate, more realistic, more worth considering. Not because they are, but because they require less effort to process. So, a quiet substitution takes place. Familiarity becomes a proxy for truth. Clarity becomes a proxy for potential. And anything that doesn't immediately click begins to feel unreliable, even if it's not. Over time, this shapes how decisions are made. You don't just prefer what you understand. You begin to trust it more. You assign it more weight. You give it more time. And without noticing, your range narrows. Not dramatically. Not in a way that feels limiting. But enough that the same types of opportunities keep appearing, and the same types of outcomes keep repeating. Because what feels most valid is often just what feels most familiar. At first, nothing seems wrong. Decisions feel reasonable, even careful. You ignore what looks unclear. You focus on what feels structured, familiar, and easier to evaluate. There's no sense of loss in the moment, no signal that anything important just slipped away. But over time, something subtle begins to accumulate. The path forward starts to look predictable. Effort increases, but the range of outcomes doesn't expand. New inputs arrive, but they resemble what you've already seen. Progress happens, but it stays within a narrow band. And this is where the cost appears, not as failure, but as repetition. Years pass, and the trajectory holds its shape, not because there were no alternatives, but because anything that didn't match your internal pattern never fully entered consideration. It was filtered out early, quietly, consistently, so the system feels stable, controlled, even rational. But underneath that stability, something else is true. The unknown was never explored enough to change the direction. And without that, change doesn't disappear. It just never begins. By this point, the pattern is no longer subtle. It's structural. What you've been calling judgment isn't really an evaluation of potential. It's a preference for recognition. The brain isn't asking, is this valuable? It's asking, do I understand this quickly enough to trust it? And those are not the same question. Recognition is fast. It feels clean, stable, low risk. Value is often slow. it looks incomplete, uncertain, sometimes even misleading at first. So the system prioritizes what can be processed efficiently. Things that fit existing mental models move forward. They feel safer, more actionable, more real. But that efficiency comes with a trade-off. Anything that requires a new frame of understanding, anything that doesn't immediately map onto what you already know, gets downgraded before it has a chance to prove itself. Not because it lacks potential, but because it demands cognitive work before it offers clarity. And over time, this creates acquired bias. You don't select opportunities based on what they could become. You select them based on how easily they can be recognized right now. So when you look back and feel like you missed something important, the story seems simple. It appeared. You hesitated, you let it pass. But that version assumes the opportunity was clearly visible in the first place. Most of the time, it wasn't. It didn't arrive labeled as important. It didn't match anything you were prepared to recognize. It didn't feel like something that deserved action. So it never became a real option. Not because you rejected it, but because you never fully saw it. And that's the uncomfortable symmetry. The same system that keeps your decisions stable, efficient, and coherent is also the one that filters out what could disrupt that stability. Not occasionally, consistently. Which means the absence of change isn't always a sign that nothing appeared. Sometimes it's the result of something appearing in a form you weren't built to recognize. So the opportunity didn't pass in front of you unnoticed. It was there, just not in a way your mind was designed to keep.